Okay, CSS. So CSS stands for Cascading Style Sheets. It's used to define styles which can be applied to HTML elements on web pages. So we make the elements in HTML, and then we can select them in CSS and add styles. What a style could look like is color of the text, color of the background, the font style, the font size, the margin or padding. These are all things you can do in CSS. And then we can take a look at what our website, look at your website right now. And then this is what will get your website looking like by the end of today. So you can see we have a blue navigation bar. When you hover, there's different effects and then stuff like that. And then we have different font, we have different colors and sizes. So CSS is very simply, it has a very simple syntax which is used, you'll use this every time. So what it looks like is you first have a selector, you have open and close curly braces, and then inside you have declarations, which consist of a property and a value. And then, so let's start off, and then yeah, once again, this is where we're gonna get to. So let's take a look at this example here. So I'd like you all just copy paste this in your code or try it out. The important thing to do is let's just put this CSS here in our new REPL. Okay, and let's go look at our website. There's nothing there. So that's fundamentally how these languages work together. You can write CSS, but if it doesn't refer to an element, then it's styling nothing. So you need to first create the elements in HTML, and then you can style them. So let's create a paragraph. So hello. And then I'm gonna temporarily just delete this. So we have our hello here. So that's hello. And then if we put this back, and now we refresh our page, and I'm gonna even change this so you guys can see it better. You see we've added styles to this. So now the text is in the center of the document and it's a shade of red. So this is basically what CSS is. You don't have to memorize any of these, like the most common ones you will memorize, but you can always search online for the attribute or the property you need. So, but let's dive into this specifically. We know that the selector is the first part. So this basically selects all of the elements which will receive this style. So when we just put a P like this, it's going to select all of the paragraph elements. And then so if I create one more paragraph, then it will also receive this style. This is just, call this 2. So we have a 2 here, which has the same style. So that's pretty basic, and we can see like, even for other elements, like if we had div, then hi. So let's say we wanted to style our div. Could someone tell me, we write CSS to make all divs, the text is blue. What would I have to put here as the selector so that all divs have the text color of blue? You guys can put it in the chat or say it out loud.
Div.
Nice. So yeah, that's exactly right, Alex. So we do that, and then we'll see now div is blue. So this concept, that's the first concept. Then the second concept is, so yeah, select by element. The second concept is select by class. So what we'll do now is we'll make a div with a class of test. And then if you remember from HTML last time, this is an HTML attribute. You always, attributes kind of look like variable declarations, because essentially you have a name of something and then you're setting it equal to a value. And then attributes are always in the first tag, the opening tag. So for example, this is, if you want to give something a class, you could do it like this. And then I'll copy paste this a couple of times. So now if we want to select everything, now we just want to select every element that has the class test. And for example, this element could even be a paragraph. And we know that our div declaration, these declarations work based off of the element. But now we can select everything with a class. So I'm going to temporarily just delete these styles. But how we select by a class is we have the name of our class. So in this case, it's test. And we put dot to signify that we're looking for a class named test, and then test. And then we can do the same styling. So for example, we could do color red. Here's a new one. We could do font weight bold. So you can take a look at this. So yeah, I'll just add another one just to make it very obvious. So you can see all of our divs, they now have the styling that we added. And then so that's a class. So classes, multiple objects can have the same class. And then that brings us to our final concept, selecting by ID. And then the difference between a class and an ID is that only one object can have that ID in the document. So it's a unique identifier. And then this is actually really useful in JavaScript. But let's practice this. So now I can create a div, and then I have to turn this off. Let's give it an ID of ID. Okay. And then we'll put ID here. And then now how we select it is we do hashtag and then the name of our ID. And then this time, like for example, let's try something. So we'll give it some, just give me a second. We'll give it some padding. So that's the space between the text content and the edge of the element. So let's try this. So we'll give it padding 10 pixels. Okay, that's good. So we'll give it padding of 10 pixels. So we made something. So we can't really see, we can see a difference, but we can open up our dev tools. And then we can hover over ID, and you can see the green stuff is the padding. So there is a 10 pixel space between the inner text content and the edge of the element. What we can do to better see that is give it a border. So how border declarations work is first you put the thickness of the border, so we'll say 1 pix. Then you put whether it's solid or dashed, so we'll just put solid for now. And then you can put a color. So now we'll see, we can see this element. It now has a border. Then we can give it a background color of aqua. So like that's what that could look like. And then, so actually a pretty important distinction is color is used for text. Color styles the color of the text, and then background color styles the color of the background. That's a little rough on the eyes. Okay, so this is all interesting stuff. So remember how last time in the HTML lesson we taught you about divs? They weren't that interesting then, but you're going to be using them. That's going to be the element that you most predominantly use. And the reason is divs come with no pre-existing styles. So it's very easy in CSS to just add styles to them because nothing's clashing with the defaults. Now, if you look at other stuff like paragraphs, like bold, there are other HTML tags, but you're never really going to use a paragraph because it comes with like some space at the top and bottom. Like you see this one, these ones were just divs, and like they're just what you expect. The paragraph has a little more space at the top and the bottom. So it's just easiest to use divs for that. And then let's go through a couple of these. Actually, we'll just add on to the one that we've made here. So we have our ID, we have this. So let's add some margin now. So if we add margin, let's say like 20 pixels, what will that do? So here's a good way to think about it. So every element has a border. Padding is the space between the border of the element and the text content. And then margin is the space between the border of the element and the surrounding elements. So we can see that a margin is pushing the other elements away. And then padding is like making the element larger, creating more space between it and the text. So these are all important concepts to use, like you'll be using these. Then there's font size. So we could do, typically the scale you use is rem. So you can try like doing it directly with pixels. Like we could set font size as 50 pixels. But rem is a nice scale to use. One rem transfers to 16 pixels. And the default size for text on a web page is 1 rem. So anything that's like the default, you can do as 1 rem. If we want like a nice title, we can do 2 rem. And then you can go even larger from there. So let's now do text align center, put this in the center. And then I will be showing you all a pretty cool resource from Google, which we will use today in our websites. So I'd like you to go to type Google Fonts, and then I'll show you how you can use fonts from Google, because you may not always want to use this font here, which is probably like, is it Helvetica? No, this is Times New Roman. Okay, you may not always want to use Times New Roman in your projects. So we can find a nice font here. Like one I use a lot is Open Sans. So if you click Open Sans or anything, the way to use this is first you can select the weights you want. So I want light, regular, and semi-bold. And then you'll see this pop up on the side. So this is link. So we're going to click at import. And then we're going to copy this code between the style tags. And then we're going to put it at the top of our CSS files, like so. And then what we're going to do, and then if we refresh our page, nothing's happened yet. So like we have access to this resource, but we haven't decided to use it yet. So to actually use it, then we can select the body. So we're saying all elements in the body will have this style, and then we can specify the font family of Open Sans. So you can see the font on our document changed. And that's basically CSS. Like it doesn't get much harder than that. It's just different concepts. In the future, we'll talk about stuff like Flexbox, which is used, like what if I want to order a bunch of items horizontally or vertically? Then we could go into CSS grid. What if I want to arrange items in a grid? So we'll get into that later, but basically this is CSS. So the last thing we'll do today is we'll style the website. So I'll give you guys a second to just get ready, open up your website, and then we'll begin. So what you guys will be doing is adding code to your style.css file. Okay, let's begin now. So the first thing you guys are gonna want to do is we had this stuff for the font. Let's copy it over. Oh, nice. Okay, this is the finished product. I'll go to my copy so I can do it with you all. Okay, that's looking good. Let's all do this here. So we're importing a font and then we're using it in the body. Then what else we can do is, let's just give, if we notice on REPL, by default, the body has a margin of 10 pixels. That's why all of this stuff, it isn't right at the edge of our document. There's a little space there. So just to get rid of that, we can do margin 0. And then look, now everything's at the edge and our fonts have kicked in. That's the first thing we'll do. So we have body, margin 0, font family. Next, we'll be doing some element styles. The first thing we learned, we've used H1s in paragraphs, so let's select them now. So actually, after this, I would encourage you, replace all of the uses of H1s in paragraphs with divs and create classes and IDs. But for now, we're just practicing our 3 ways to select items. So we will be using element styles. But let's look at this. So we're basically to our headers, we're giving them a color and making them larger. And then to our paragraphs, we're changing the line height. So we're changing the height of each line. So basically it's the spacing between lines. So if we look at this now, we have a nice header. We have a nice paragraph here, but our navigation bar is still looking pretty bad. So let's style that. We can make a class. So remember last time, we made all of this. Okay, yeah. So if we want to specifically style our navigation bar, we can give the div class of nav. Come on. Okay, and then actually I want us to think for a second. Can this be an ID? Like we can make something, you can give it an ID if we're only going to use it once on our web page. So does anyone have any ideas? Could we, instead of doing class nav, could we do ID in this case?
Well, every page has a nav bar, like a copy of it, so we can't use ID because we're going to use it multiple times.
You know what? Okay, great, Alex. I'm glad you said that. So one important thing is that each HTML file exists independently of the others in respect to CSS. So we really need to look at it like only on a per HTML file basis. So as long as we use nav only once for each file, we can use it as an ID. So we can actually use ID nav here. But yeah, this is a really important concept too. So let's add an ID to our divs of nav. So we have that, and then once you all have that, we'll select it with the hashtag, and then we'll give it these stylings here, a nice background color and padding. So I'm going fast in the interest of time, so I just recommend just copy it. Don't worry about typing it out. And then you can always do this if you can't, if you fall behind, you can always do this by yourself. So this is what we have right now. This is looking pretty good, but our nav links need some help. So we have this. So what the approach would be is to each of our navigation links, to each of our links, we would add the class navlink, and then that would work. In the interest of time, though, I'm going to show you this. I don't recommend it usually. Like it actually leads to worse performance, but it's honestly like fine here. So what we can do is we could do a hashtag nav, then space, and then we could do a. So that means we're gonna style all of the links which are inside of an element which has an ID of nav. And actually REPL's pretty helpful in this respect. You can hover and it'll show you which elements are being styled. So now if we apply our styling here, we can see that it works. Here's the reason I wouldn't recommend it though. So when you make larger websites, you're going to have a lot of elements on the page. And how how like nested like CSS declarations work is it's not going to first find all elements with hashtag with ID nav on the page and look through them for links. It actually like finds all the links on the page and then looks at which one of them have parents which have an ID of nav. So you can imagine if you have a lot of links, even if you don't have a lot of links inside of nav, if you have a lot of links on your page, it's not going to be the best solution. So I think I would recommend just directly always use an ID or a class and directly target something instead of kind of using this technique. So let's just skip this content thing for now. And then the final concept before we break for today are how do you add a hover effect to something? So since I'm using nav A, let's just stick with this. So to any element, if you add :hover at the end, this is kind of like, this is our selection. So we just copy this and put :hover. So what this does is it applies a style whenever you hover on something. As a test, let's make them red when we hover on them. So you can see I hover on this and it becomes red. And then I'll just remove the transition duration for now. So you can see you hover, becomes red. Transition duration is pretty important. So yeah, so look through look at the final result if you want the nice hover effect. You can look at the CSS and then you could add that there. So basically hover, and then I guess there's one more we could take a look at, which is active, I believe. So what active is style on a click. So when you click something, see I'm hovering, nothing's happening. But finally when I click, then this style is added. So yeah, that covers our first lesson for CSS. Yeah, so thanks for coming. I hope you all enjoyed it, and then stay tuned for next time. Next time we are going to be going into how to use JavaScript to add functionality to your websites. And then we will also be giving you more news about what we're doing at PaliPython, like as a team, and then our hackathon that we've got planned, and then some of our other long-term goals. Okay, thank you
Wait,
everyone.
can you post this video on YouTube?
Yeah, I will.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye. Okay, bye everyone.